Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing fine. And guess what? Today we're going to continue our session on Unit First Teaching Aptitude, and today we're going to have a session on one of the important topic in our unit is methods of teaching and learning. I hope you all are excited. I'm pretty excited. So, let's begin. Teaching methods are like the tools a teacher uses to help a student learn, right? It's not just about what you teach, but how you teach it, right? These methods are influenced by what the students are like and what they need to learn. It's all about finding the best way to help students understand and engage with the subject. Nowadays, schools are really into boosting creativity. It's seen as the key to moving forward and coming up with new ideas. The type of teaching method a teacher chooses can depend on a lot of things like their own beliefs about education, the kind of students they have, the subjects they are teaching, and what their school aims to achieve. When it comes to teaching theories, there are basically four big categories, right? And these are based on two main ideas: whether the teacher or the student is at the center of the learning process, and whether high tech or low tech materials are used. So let's break down a little bit, right? So the first thing you see, we have teacher centered approach to learning. Quite important. In a teacher centered approach, the teacher is the boss, right? They are the main source of knowledge and information. Students in this kind of setup usually just sit and listen to the teacher, taking in information and then getting tested on it. The teacher's main job is to teach and then separately to test the students on what they have learned. So the tests are usually the kind of, where there's a right or wrong answer, like multiple choice or fill in the blank questions, right? Direct instruction is a popular method in this approach. Here the teacher follows a very specific plan for each lesson, right? It's like a script for teaching. The students mainly learn by listening and watching. It's a bit like watching a cooking show where you watch the chef cook and try to learn from that, right? So this traditional way of teaching where the teacher does most of the talking and decision making. It is also sometimes called teacher centered learning. In this kind of classroom, the teacher decides everything: what the student will learn, how they learn it, and how to check if they have actually learned it, right? So now let's add some real life flavor to this, right? So picture a history class where the teacher is giving a lecture on World War II, right? So the students are taking notes, and later they'll have a test with question like what year did the war start and who were the main countries involved, right? So this is a classic example of teacher centered learning. The teacher is sharing knowledge and the students are expected to observe it. And in this kind of setup, the teacher's experience and knowledge are kind of super valuable, right? They guide the students through the learning process almost like a tour guide in a museum. But it's not just about kind of pouring facts into the student's head. Actually, good teachers in a teacher centered classroom know how to make the material interesting and relatable. They might share personal stories related to the topic or draw connections to current events, making the past come alive in the present, right? So teacher centered learning has its place, right? Especially when it comes to covering a lot of ground quickly or dealing with really factual subject. But like any method, it's not one size kind of fits all. Different students and different subjects might need a different approach. So the key is finding the right balance and knowing your students like well enough to understand what works best for them. So this is teacher centered approach to learning. Let me tell you what comes under it, right? So the first thing comes is direct instruction or teaching, right? As I told you, teaching and instruction are the same word. In exam they ask like separately, but remember they both represent the same, right? So direct instruction is like a personal guide on a journey through learning, right? So imagine you're hiking through a dense forest, right? And the teacher is that experienced guide who knows the path inside out. They lead the way, providing clear step by step instruction on what to do and also where to go. right? So this method is really cool because it works for everyone, no matter their background, right? So think of it as a one size fits all approach to teaching. It's a kind of like when you're learning to cook, having someone show you exactly how to chop an onion or knead dough makes it so much easier to get it right, right? For example, learning the order of the planet is a way easier when someone just tells you, right? Now next, let me tell you about the lecture method. It is also comes under teacher centered approach, right? And this is like attending a big concert where the expert is the rock star on the stage, right? Sharing their wisdom with a large audience. It's a kind of fantastic way to soak up a ton of information in one go. Imagine you're at a TED talk where the speaker captivates you with their knowledge and experience. It's not just about facts, it's like a professional showing you the ropes in real time, which is pretty awesome, right? A lecture can take on different flavors. Sometimes they come with cool visuals like a documentary with stunning images that make the topic come alive. Other time it's more like a news brief, right? Just the facts, straightforward and to the point. Right, and then there are those that feel like listening to engaging storyteller or a passionate advocate. Right, it's not just about learning; it's about feeling inspired or persuaded. Right, so to jazz up lecture, it's a bit like being a DJ at a party, right? Start by dropping the main beats. So those are your key points. Then weave in a catchy theme that runs through the entire session, making it more memorable, right? So use real life example as your remixes, right? Adding flavor and context, keeping the crowd engaged by repeating the catchy parts so they really kind of stick. And finally, end with a bang, summarize and loop back to your main theme. It leaves your audience thinking, wow, that was a kind of journey, right? So both direct instruction and lecture method have their own magic. It's like choosing between a hands-on workshop and a captivating seminar. Each has unique way of making learning an adventure. Next, let me tell you about demonstration method. This is also important and it also comes into teacher centered approach, quite important. So think of demonstration methods like a cooking show, right? The teacher is the chef who shows step by step how to make a dish. Just like in a cooking show, students get more excited and understand better when they see things happening right in front of them, right? Rather than just hearing about it. Imagine a science class where the teacher is demonstrating a chemical reaction. It's way more engaging to see the colors change, right? And this method is like a hands-on experience where using your senses makes the learning stick in your brain. Even though the teacher leads the show, it's not all one-sided. They encourage students to jump in, ask questions, and even try things out themselves. This way, students get really interested and involved. For example, after watching the teacher perform an experiment, students might get a chance to do it themselves, right? So the teacher plans everything carefully, right? Rehearses beforehand and ensure everyone in the class is included and understand the goal of the lesson. Let me tell you about another important method, which is flipped classroom. In exam they have asked question based on that also. Now imagine a flipped classroom as if you're watching a YouTube tutorial at home to learn how to fix a bike, right? You get the basic idea at home at your own pace without someone directly teaching you. Then when you go to a workshop, which is your classroom, right, you're ready to actually work on fixing a bike with others. So in this setup, the teacher's more like a coach. They don't stand and lecture but set up the learning materials and let the students dive in during the class time. And it's a bit like having a personal trainer who tells you what exercises to do at home and then helps you perfect them in the gym. This method is great because the students can learn the basics at their own speed without feeling rushed and then use class time for more challenging and interactive stuff, right? So it's more about teamwork, discussions, and getting hands-on experience rather than just listening to a lecture. Now, let me tell you about the team teaching method. It's very important also because by the name you can understand, right? It's like having a band with different musicians instead of solo performance. So, a group of teachers, each with their own unique skills and styles, come together to teach a class. Right? They plan the course, decide on what and how to teach, and evaluate the students together. Right? So, let me give you an example. Imagine a history project where one teacher is great at storytelling, making the historical events come alive, while another is awesome with dates and facts. Right? Together, they can make the subject more interesting and also comprehensive. Sometimes new teachers pair up with experienced ones, just like an apprentice learning from a master. It's a mix of innovation, flexibility, and teamwork, right? So the class gets to experience different teaching styles, which keeps things fresh and engaging. Plus, with more than one teacher, it's easier to tailor the lessons to what students need and keep the class size, location, and timing more flexible. Right. So, in all these methods, the key idea is to make learning more interactive, engaging, and tailored to students' need. Whether it's seeing a concept in action, learning at your own pace, or benefiting from the strength of multiple teachers, each methods bring something special to the table. Right. Now, let me tell you the benefits of teacher centered classroom or method, right? So, imagine walking into a classroom, right, where everything's kind of, super organized, and then there is a calm vibe because the teachers got everything under control. It's like being in a library, but instead of books, it's all about the lessons, right? So, the teacher is like the captain of a ship, steering everything and making sure no one misses out on the important stuff. They plan and prepare everything right down to the last detail. It's a kind of like watching a chef in a top notch restaurant. They know exactly what they are doing and everything runs smoothly. Right? Let me give you an example. Remember, right, Mrs. Patel from our old high school, her classes were always so structured. We knew exactly what to expect each day, and honestly, it was kind of comforting. She was totally in her element and that confident. It was kind of contagious. We all felt it. Right. So, let me tell you about the drawbacks of a teacher centered classroom. Right. So, this style can be a bit like watching a one man show. Right. If the teacher isn't kind of, super engaging, or if the lesson isn't gripping, it can be a kind of snooze fest, right? Everybody will sleep off. So picture sitting in, Mr. Patel's history class, where he just droned on and off. Half of the class was kind of daydreaming about the weekend. Not exactly the most exciting way to learn about the Civil War, right? So another thing is, when you're always working solo, you miss out on bouncing ideas of your classmates. Like in Mrs. Patel's math class, we never got to work in a groups. It was always do your own homework. But remember how we used to study together for her tests, right? We learned so much from each other during those sessions. Also, when it's always the teacher kind of talking, you don't get much chance to develop your own voice and think about how important it is to speak up in a meeting or present your ideas. If you're not practicing that in school, where will you learn it? Right. So in the end, while a teacher centered classroom has its own advantage or perks like keeping things orderly and focused, it's a kind of like eating the same sandwich every day. It's reliable, but you might be missing out on some flavors out there, right? And collaborating with others, getting to express your own ideas, and learning to think critically are pretty essential spices in the recipe of your education. Don't you think? Now, let me tell you student centered approach to learning. Now, we already discussed about teacher centered approach. Now, it's time to think about a student, right? Let me tell you about the student centered approach to learning, right? And these days, it's very kind of trending. Right. So this student-centered learning is all about making the classroom a space where both teachers and students are equally involved in learning process. It's like flipping the traditional teaching model on its head. Right. Instead of the teacher being the sole fountain of knowledge, they become more like a coach or a guide or a mentor, right? Helping students navigate through the learning material. So in this approach, learning is more personalized. Remember that keyword, quite important, right? So it's tailored to each student's interest, their ability, and how they learn best. Right. So imagine a classroom where one student might be diving deep into a project on solar energy because they are passionate about environmental science, while another might be engrossed in creating a portfolio about a Renaissance art or literature. So the teacher is there to support, challenge, and inspire rather than just deliver a kind of one size lecture, right? So real life application of this method could look like something like this. A science teacher, instead of just teaching the chapter on ecosystem from the textbook, might encourage students to start a mini garden or terrarium, right? And students could choose the plants, right, and research how to care for them and observe how they interact. So the teacher guides them, but the students are the ones getting their hands dirty, right? And they are learning by doing, and that's a big part of what student centered learning is about, right? And assessment in this method isn't just about tests and quizzes. It's about looking at how students apply what they have learned in various ways, right? It could be kind of group projects or presentation or even how they contribute to class discussions. It's all about seeing how students use and understand the knowledge, not just whether they can memorize it. So the beauty of student centered learning is, is that it prepares students for real life. It's not just about memorizing facts, it's about developing skills like problem solving, critical thinking, and being able to learn independently. And these are skills that are crucial outside the classroom, especially in the real world. Right? So, to give you in a language class, instead of just learning grammar and vocabulary from a book, students might be asked to interview a native speaker, right, and create a short film or write a blogs in the language they are learning. So this way they're not just learning the language, they're also learning how to communicate, engage with different cultures, and express themselves creatively. So in short, student centered learning is all about making learning more engaging and personalized and relevant to the real world. It acknowledges that each student is unique and learns differently, and it aims to cater to those differences. So teachers in this approach are like the conductor of an orchestra, ensuring each student plays their part but allowing them to bring their own style and personality to the music, right? And in that student centered approach, we have differentiated instruction or learning or teaching, right? So imagine you're a teacher in a classroom full of kids who all learn in their own unique ways. Some might grasp things by listening, others by doing, and some might prefer reading quietly by themselves. So, differentiated instruction is all about recognizing these differences. It's like being a chef in a restaurant where every customer has a different taste preference and you tailor each dish to meet those individual tastes, right? For example, let's say you're teaching about the water cycle, right? Some kids might learn best by watching a video about it, while others might prefer a hands-on experience with evaporation and condensation, right? And then there are some students who might love to write a story about the journey of a water droplet. In this way, you're differentiating the content, what they learn, the process, how they learn it, the product, what they create to show their learning, and even the learning environment, which is kind of making the classroom a space where everyone's learning style is supported, right? And next is very important one is inquiry based learning, right? Now it's like turning the classroom into detective scene where every student is a detective trying to solve a mystery, right? Instead of just telling them facts, You start by throwing out question, a problem or a scenario. It's like asking, why do you think leaves change color in the fall? Instead of just explaining the process of photosynthesis, in this approach, the teacher is more like a coach on the sidelines, right? Cheering and guiding the students as they explore, right? And rather than being the main player, it's not just about observing facts, it's about asking questions, digging deep, and actively finding answers. For instance, students might be given a task to figure out how to clean up an oil spill in the ocean, right? And they'll have to research, conduct experiments, maybe even talk to experts, and finally come up with their own solutions. And this method is great for developing thinking and problem solving skills. So in both these approaches, the key is to make learning more engaging, dynamic, and suited to each student's need and curiosities. It's about stepping away from kind of one size teaching method and making learning a more personalized and interactive experience. And this way every student feels involved and motivated to learn in a way that best works for them, right? Now another important learning or teaching is kinesthetic learning. Let me give you a condition, right? Have you ever learned something by actually doing it instead of just reading about it or listening to someone else explain it? That's kinesthetic learning in a nutshell, guys. It's all about learning through physical activities. Think of it like this. Instead of teacher just talking at the front of the class, students get to be more in charge of how they learn. They can move around, touch things, and really get hands on with their learning. For example, let's say you're trying to learn how to play the guitar. You could read a book about it or listen to someone explain it, but you'll probably learn faster and remember more if you actually pick up a guitar and start practicing. The same goes for a kid learning to ride a bike, and they might fall a few times, but they learn best by actually getting on the bike and kind of pedaling away. And if you're the type of who loves crafting and making things with your own hands, then you're a kind of kinesthetic learner, right? And this is very important. And also you'll find that you remember stuff better when you're physically involved in this learning process, like making a model or a chart or a poster, right? And let me tell you, another important learning method or teaching method is a kind of individuals learning. The same, it is also called personalized learning, individualized instruction, or personal learning environment, and direct instruction as well, right? So let's talk about this individual learning. It's like getting a custom made suit instead of one off the rack. Yeah, it fits you just right? So this approach is all about tailoring education to fit each student's unique needs, interests, and skills. It's super student focused, right? But it still needs teachers to guide the way, check on progress, and tweak the learning plan as they needed. Think about a teacher who notices a student's loves kind of video games and uses that to teach coding or math. So that's individual learning. It's not kind of one kind of class, but it's more like picking and choosing what works for each student, right? And technology plays a big role here, helping to create learning plans and that are just right for each student. It's like having a learning journey where you get to pick the stops along the way, and you only move forward when you are actually ready. And a good example is a student who struggles with traditional math but excels when it's presented in a practical real world context. So a teacher might set up a project where the student plans a budget for a small event, applying math skills in a way that makes sense to them. And this approach is not just about passing tests, it's about really understanding the material and being ready for life after school, like college or a different career, right? So in both kinesthetic and individual learning, the key is making education a personal experience. It's about learning in a way that makes sense to you, using methods that match your style and interest, whether it's learning by doing or having lessons designed just for you. It's all about making learning an adventure that you are excited to be on, right? Now let me tell you about another learning, which is expeditionary learning. You know what it is? It is a kind of exciting and hands-on approach to education, inspired by the ideas of German educator Kurt Hahn, right? Also known for the founding Outward Bound. It's like taking learning on an adventure where students embark on expedition to dive deep into topics that matter to their school and also community. Imagine students not just sitting in a classroom but actively exploring real world issues. For example, a student in a bustling city might dive into the nitty gritty of pollution, not just by reading about it, but by visiting areas affected by it, understanding its impact, and even coming up with kind of practical solution, right? And this approach isn't just about one subject, it's a cocktail of different learning areas blended together. Students learn about self discovery, like finding out what they are really passionate about. They get to have amazing ideas, take charge of their learning, and learn the value of empathy and caring. It's about understanding success and failure, learning to work together, and appreciating diversity and inclusion. This learning style also brings students closer to nature, encourages them to spend time in reflection, and teaches them the importance of service and compassion, right? A real life example could be a class in a coastal city, right? Learning about marine pollution. They might calculate pollution levels, visit affected beaches, and talk to local experts. Then they could brainstorm solutions like organizing a beach cleanup or an awareness campaign, right? Truly making a difference in their community. So on the tech side, like tools like G Suite, like think of Google Docs, Sheets, and Drives are great helpers, making it easier for students to research, present, and carry out their projects. Now let me tell you about the programmed learning, right? And it is a kind of bit different. You know why? Because it's like having a personal tutor in the form of a textbook, computer, or a special teaching machine. So the material is broken down into bite-sized pieces or a larger chunk, and is presented in a logical order that's been tested for effectiveness. After each part, there are questions to check if the students have understood the material with immediate feedback. It's like playing a game, where you get instant response to your actions. So the course objectives are crystal clear and measurable. There's usually a pre-test to see where students stand at the beginning and an assessment at the end. So the materials are regularly tested and updated based on feedback, ensuring they're always up to stuff. The steps and the teaching mediums are carefully chosen to suit for both the subject matter and the students. For instance, think of learning a new language. Right, the programmed material might start with basic words, then short sentences, and gradually build up to more complex conversation. Each step has exercises and you get immediate feedback. Both expeditionary and programmed learning requires active participation from the learner, but they are quite different in how they are approached, right? So one is about jumping into real life situation and solving problems, while the other is more structured, step by step learning with instant feedback. Both have their unique benefits and can be incredibly effective in their own ways, right? Now let me tell you about another important learning method, which is game-based learning. Imagine a classroom where learning feels more like playing your favorite video games than traditional studying, right? That'll be awesome, right? If everybody gets that kind of learning. Well, that's the essence of game-based learning. It's not just about having fun, it's about engaging in activities that make learning an active process. Think of it like playing Monopoly to understand economics, or using a game like Minecraft to explore architectural concepts, right? So in these environments, students don't just passively observe information, they make choices, try out different strategies, and see the outcomes of their actions, much like they would do in the video game, right? For instance, a history teacher might use a role-playing game where students act out historical events, right? So as they dive into their roles, they're not just memorizing dates and names, they're understanding the emotions and complexity of historical figures. And just like in a video games, there are rewards, right? And maybe badges or points for achieving certain goals or mastering certain concept. However, it's not all left up to the game. Teachers play a key role in designing these educational experiences, ensuring that while the students have the freedom to explore, they are still guided toward a specific learning objective. It's a bit like guided tour where you can still wander off and explore side paths on your own, but ultimately follow a set of route, right? Now let me tell you another important learning, which is heuristic learning. You know what it is like? It's like solving a jigsaw puzzle without seeing the picture on the box. It's about using hands-on practical methods to figure out solutions. These methods might not be perfect, but they're often good enough to get the job done. It's like when you're cooking and you don't have a specific ingredient, so you make an educated guess and use a substitute, right? You're using past experiences and a bit of intuition to solve a new problem. For instance, if you're trying to solve a complex math problem and get stuck, you might start by guessing the answer and then work backwards to see if it makes sense. Or if you're learning a new language and don't know a word, you might try to infer its meaning from the context or related words that you already know. And this approach is particularly helpful when dealing with new or complex problems where there is no clear textbook or answer, right? It encourages students to think outside the box and not be afraid of making mistakes. After all, sometimes the best way to learn is by trial and error, right? And it's about exploring different possibilities and learning from each attempt, gradually building up a better understanding of the problem at hand, right? So in both game-based and heuristic learning, the key is active participation, right? Students are not just passive recipient of information, they're explorers, right? And problem solvers actively engaged in their learning journey. Their hands-on, immersive approach can make learning more enjoyable and memorable, helping students develop not just knowledge but also critical thinking and problem solving skills that they can use in real life situations. Now that we have learned about teacher centered approach and a student centered approach, let me tell you other types of methods like collaborative learning, cooperative discussion, peer learning, brainstorming, buzz session, project method, and ultimately we'll move on to fishbowl, which they have asked question based on that, right? So let me tell you the first one, which is collaborative learning. So this collaborative learning is like when a bunch of people come together to learn something. It's not like studying alone. Here you team up and use each other's strengths, right? Imagine you're working on a project and you're stuck on something. In collaborative learning, you can just ask your mate for help or bounce ideas off each other, right? And it's all about sharing experiences and playing different roles to learn together. This kind of learning isn't just about sitting together in a classroom. It can happen in chat rooms or online forums too, where you can discuss things with others. Let's say there is a group project, right? And everyone has to pitch in. It could be solving a tough math problem together or debating a hot topic or studying for a test as a team. This method is closely linked to what's called cooperative learning. In cooperative learning, right, so the classroom kind of vibe changes. Instead of working solo, students work in groups to reach their academic goals. This isn't about who gets the highest grade, it's about helping each other to understand and learn better, right? So now the teacher's role changes too. You know why? Instead of just giving out information, they help guide the learning process. It's like everyone wins when the group does well, right? And these tasks need creativity, deep thinking, and are usually more open-ended. And guess what? Students often feel happier learning this way. Now, let me tell you about the cooperative learning. For cooperative learning to work well, there are few key ingredients. You know what? First, everyone needs to feel like they're in the same boat. That's positive interdependence, right? Then there is being responsible both as individuals and as a group. It's important to really talk and work together, right? And that's promotive interaction. Also, everyone needs to learn how to work well in a group, which means picking up good team skills, right? And lastly, there's this group processing where the group reflects on how well they're working together and what they can improve, right? And think about a time when you had to work on a project, right? And maybe someone was great at researching, another was a kind of pro at making slides, and you kind of were good at presenting. So each person's skills help make the project better. Or consider a study group where everyone share notes and explains different parts of the lesson. You end up understanding things better because you learning from each other, and that's the beauty of collaborative and cooperative learning. Next, let me tell you about the discussion methods in learning. Sometime in exam they ask, but very rarely. I think I have seen a couple of questions that they have asked based on that discussion methods, right? So imagine you're in a classroom or maybe even a group, study session. The idea is here to have an open and free flowing chat about various topics. It's not just the teacher talking at you, it's more about everyone sharing their thoughts and learning from each other. This can happen in pairs, small groups, or even with the whole class. Right? Think about it like this. You're discussing a book in a class, right? And everyone has different viewpoints. And as they share, you start seeing things in the book you hadn't noticed before, right? Or maybe it's not about a book. Perhaps you're all talking about a current issue like climate change or a new technology, right? So the conversation isn't limited to just what's written in textbook. It's about exploring ideas from all angles, like a lively debate you might have with your friends about a trending topic on social media, right? A cool part of this discussion is that they are not just one. You don't just listen, right? You also contribute. It's like when you're playing a team sport. Everyone has a role, right? And you work together to understand the subject better. This method teaches you to think on your feet. Imagine you're in a debate and someone challenges your point. You need to come up with a good counter argument fast, right? So that's the kind of a skill these discussions help to build, right? Next, let me tell you about the peer learning, right? And this is a bit like when you're trying to figure out a video game, and instead of going solo, you team up with a friend, like in PUBG, right? You have like your own squad, and sometimes somebody will attack, or somebody will just revive you, all these stuff, right? And you share tips and strategies and you learn from each other. So in a classroom setting, it's similar. You're working with classmates to achieve your learning goals, but instead of competing against each other, you're helping each other out. Let's say you're working on a group project about renewable energy. You might not be an expert on solar panels, but one of your classmates is, right? By working together, you get a deeper understanding of the topic. It's a two-way street. You help your peers and they help you back. And this approach is really about everyone bringing something to the table and learning together. Right? It's like when you're in a study group and each person takes a turn teaching the others about a different topic, or when you're trying to learn a new language and you practice speaking with a friend who's also learning it. You're not just learning from your teachers, but you're learning from each other. It's more like a relaxed, collaborative way of learning where you can bounce ideas off each other, just like having a conversation with a friend, about a new movie or a game. Right. So in both discussion methods and peer learning, the key is collaboration. You're not just sitting back and taking notes, you're actively involved, sharing ideas, challenging each other, and building on what you learn. It's more engaging, more interactive, and let's face it, it's a kind of a lot more fun than traditional learning methods. Plus, it prepares you for the real world where teamwork and collaboration are super important. Right. Now let me tell you about the brainstorming. So by the name you can understand it's all about the ideas, right? So it's like this super cool and informal method where a bunch of people, like, say a group of students or a team at work, come together to throw around ideas about certain topic or problem. Imagine you're in a room with your classmates when your teacher throws out a question like, how can we make our school more eco-friendly? Right? So everyone kind of, start shouting out ideas, no matter how wild or unconventional they might be. So the beauty of brainstorming is that there is no judgment. You can say, let's build a rooftop garden, right? Or what about solar panels in the parking lot? And nobody is going to shoot your ideas down, right? And it's all about quantity over quality at this stage. After the session, you'd sift through these ideas, sort them out, and see which ones are actually doable. It's like when you're trying to decide where to go for your next group vacation, someone might suggest the moon, which is fun to think about, but not really practical, right? So then someone else suggests camping in the national park nearby, which is more realistic and something you can work with. Right, now let me tell you about the buzz session. And now imagine a buzz session as a bunch of mini brainstorming groups, all kind of buzzing with energy. Picture a classroom where the teacher says, all right, let's split up and discuss our thoughts on Shakespeare's Hamlet. Right, so everyone forms little kind of huddles and diving deep into conversation. In one corner, a group is debating whether Hamlet was really mad or just pretending. Right, so in another, students are brainstorming modern day scenario that mirrors the play's theme. Right, so a real life example could be in a business setting. So the boss says we need fresh ideas for our social media strategy. So the team breaks into small groups, each focusing on different aspects like Instagram, Twitter, now X, right, or YouTube. They chat, debate, and bounce ideas off each other. Maybe someone recalls a viral tweet they saw and shares it with the group, kind of sparking a new train of thought. So the goal is to learn from each other and build on each person's input, creating a rich tapestry of ideas. So in both brainstorming and buzz session, the magic happens when people feel free to speak their minds and build on each other's creativity. It's like a jam session, right? But with ideas instead of music, right? Just like in a jam session, sometimes the most unexpected contribution can lead to the most amazing results and thoughts, right? Okay, now let me tell you about the fishbowl. Right, and this fishbowl conversation is a kind of typical, right? Picture a group of people sitting in a circle having a deep conversation about a specific topic. That's the essence of fishbowl conversation, right? And it's about using more interactive settings like conferences, right, where everyone's encouraged to share their thoughts, right? And here's how it works, right? There is an inner circle, kind of the fishbowl, where the discussion happens, and an outer circle where other students sit, listen, and take notes. It's like being in a live podcast recording where you can actually see the speakers discussion various topics right in front of you. So the best part, a bunch of people can get involved in the discussion, making it super interactive. For instance, imagine a fishbowl conversation in a class about climate change. So a few students in the inner circle could be debating the impact of global warming, while those in the outer circle listen, learn, and kind of note down all important points. So later they might even get a chance to jump into the fishbowl and share their views. So this method is great for getting everyone involved, and for seeing different perspective on a topic. So these methods aren't just about learning, guys. They are about experiencing and participating, whether it's building something from scratch or with the project methods, or diving deep into discussions with the fishbowl method. It's all about making learning active and fun and kind of super engaging, right? So guys, that's all for this teaching methods. We already discussed about a teacher centered and also learner centered or a student centered. We also talked about some of the other teaching methods or learning method that in the exam they ask. So all of these methods are quite important because that you're going to get one question based on that, right? So that's all for today. And remember, in our next session, we're going to talk about offline versus online teaching. And remember all these points which you can see over your screen, like Swayam, Swayam Prabha, PM, eVidya, MOOCs, diksha, all these stuff, right? And they ask question based on that. So in that perspective, your next session is quite important, that you cannot afford to miss it, right? So be there, and I'll see you tomorrow, and have a good day. Bye bye.